Hundreds missing at sea as a fierce typhoon lashes the Philippines. Mass arrests in Nepal as riot police clash with exiles from Tibet. 12 die in Mexico City as a police raid on underage drinkers goes horribly wrong.
And the Socceroos set out to climb the Great Wall of China.
Good evening and welcome to SBS World News Australia. I'm Lee Lin Chin.
And I'm Craig Foster.
Also tonight, the death of cricketer's wife Jane McGrath after a long fight against breast cancer.
And Russia reaches the Euro 2008 semi-finals as super coach Horst Hiddink weaves his magic yet again.
But first to a tragedy unfolding tonight off the central Philippines. Hundreds of people are feared drowned aboard a large inter-island ferry which has foundered in seas being lashed by Typhoon Fengshen. Rescue vessels are attempting to reach the stricken MV Princess of the Stars, carrying up to 800 people, which capsized and sank after running aground off Sibuyan Island. The typhoon has also brought flash floods and landslides which have killed more than 60 people on land.
Children wade to safety in the western Visayas, one of the regions hardest hit by Typhoon Fengshen. These are just some of the hundreds of thousands of Filipinos who had to be evacuated when heavy winds swept through their villages. In one dramatic rescue, lifesavers swam out to two women stranded in a tree. They battled deep rushing water, only making it to safety by a rubber float ring and a rope. Homes across the southern Philippines were inundated and possessions destroyed. Many people were lucky to escape with their lives as torrents of water subsumed their villages. Further south in Mindanao, where at least 17 people were reported killed, residents were evacuated with the help of the military, some resorting to unorthodox means to escape their homes. Fengshen is named after the god of wind in China, and the wind certainly packed a punch, measured up to 195 kilometres an hour. Even in the capital Manila, Fengshen downed power lines, cutting electricity to hundreds of households. This is the sixth typhoon to hit the Philippines this season, but by far the worst. Environmental groups blame illegal logging for worsening floods and landslides. Meanwhile, it's an anxious wait for relatives of passengers aboard the stricken vessel Princess of the Stars. Questions have been raised as to why the inter-island ferry had been given the all-clear to leave port before hitting the rough weather. Jenny Lavelle, World News Australia.
More than 500 Tibetan exiles have been arrested by riot police during fierce battles in the streets of the Nepalese capital Kathmandu. They were protesting against yesterday's stage-managed Olympic torch relay through the Tibetan capital Lhasa, the latest leg of its often turbulent passage around the world. The provincial Communist Party chief in Tibet later vowed to smash what he called the divisive schemes of followers of the Dalai Lama.
Riot police struggled to hold back Tibetan exiles protesting outside the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu. There have been near-daily demonstrations in the Nepalese capital since the March riots in Tibet, when exile groups claim more than 200 people were killed. But this was by far the biggest, and riot police had orders to halt it. More than 20,000 Tibetans live in Nepal. They were outraged by the arrests of thousands of people in their homeland in the security crackdown after the March riots. The staging of the Olympic torch relay through Lhasa has aggravated tensions. But Nepal considers Tibet to be a part of China, which is a key aid donor and trade partner, and anti-Chinese activities are banned. And many Chinese have been angered by the protests against Chinese rule during international legs of the torch relay. In the Tibetan capital, where most of the population had been told to stay at home and police lined the streets, there were no reports of unrest during yesterday's torch ceremony. The government has again blamed followers of the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, for unrest in Tibet and for ongoing international protests.
分裂图谋，维护西藏社会稳定，确保我们国家安全，为北京奥运会的成功举办做出积极的贡献。
The United Nations and international rights groups have accused Nepalese authorities of using excessive force to stop protests. Those detained at previous rallies in Kathmandu have been quickly released. But police now appear determined to put an end to the demonstrations, and 3 protest leaders have been jailed for 3 months. Ross Cameron, World News Australia.
A police raid targeting underage drinkers at a nightclub in Mexico City has resulted in the deaths of 12 people as hundreds of young partygoers stampeded in the rush to get out. The city's mayor says the police made serious mistakes during the operation. He's ordered an immediate investigation into the tragedy.
One of these victims was just 13 years old. The girl and 2 others aged 14 and 16 were among the 9 students and club employees who died. 3 police officers were also killed in a bus that went horribly wrong. The police entered the News Divine nightclub to check on reports of underage drinking and drugs, but their presence caused hundreds of young partygoers celebrating the end of the school year to panic. This girl, who was in the club with her brother, says the officers used tear gas and violence, and that's what caused the stampede.
Porque gracias a ellos muchos chavitos murieron. Gracias a ellos mi hermano está en coma porque fueron ellos los que ocasionaron todo eso.
The police deny using tear gas and blame the owner for alerting his patrons about the police operation over a loudspeaker. According to Police Chief Joel Ortega, 7 youngsters and 3 of his officers suffocated in front of the club's only emergency exit, which was blocked by cases of beer. 2 others died later, and a dozen more people were taken to hospital, 3 of them with serious injuries. As their families waited for news, Mexico City's mayor took action against the police department. Mayor Marcelo Ebrard suspended the police director and every official involved in the raid. 39 people were arrested, including the owner of the club. Sergei Pianella, World News Australia.
Now to events in Zimbabwe. The country's opposition party is due to meet today to decide on whether to pull out of Friday's presidential runoff election. Dozens of opposition supporters from the Movement for Democratic Change have reportedly been killed during the campaign. SBS is banned from reporting from Zimbabwe, but our senior correspondent, Brian Thompson, is monitoring events from neighbouring South Africa. He joins us now on the line from Johannesburg. Brian, what's the latest indication on whether the MDC will pull out of next week's runoff poll?
Well, Leland, as has been widely reported over the past few weeks, a campaign of terror has been unleashed by the ruling ZANU-PF party in Zimbabwe. More than 70 opposition supporters have been killed, often in quite gruesome fashion. In addition, hundreds have been injured and thousands have been forced to attend what are called re-education camps where they're told not to vote for the MDC. This intimidation has worked to a certain extent, and the MDC leadership is now deeply split on whether to continue with the campaign. But they do know if they don't, they'll be playing into President Mugabe's hands, as he would automatically be declared the winner. For the time being, the opposition is trying to continue the fight. MDC leader Morgan Tsvangirai is due to address a rally in Harare today. That'll be the first rally he's been allowed to hold so far, and it's only taking place following a court order. But we've just heard in the last hour or so that the location of both the MDC meeting and the rally has been surrounded by the military, and the MDC people we've spoken to say they are in fear for their lives. So some quite dramatic developments there in the last couple of hours.
South African mediators are, as we speak, in Zimbabwe. Can you update us on their progress?
Well, Leland, South African nations have charged South Africa with negotiating a way out of this crisis. South African President Thabo Mbeki went to Zimbabwe last week for talks with both Tsvangirai and Mugabe. Those talks never got very far, and now he's sent in Mbeki has sent in 2 of his cabinet ministers to negotiate. South Africa would like to see these elections cancelled and a government of national unity formed. But President Mugabe is refusing to even meet Tsvangirai, and ZANU-PF will only consider a government of national unity if it is in charge. And to be honest, there's no way the MDC is going to agree to that, because they won the first round of this election, and they insist that if there is to be a government of national unity, that it is them that should lead it.
Brian, thank you very much for that. And later in the bulletin, we'll bring you part 2 of Brian Thompson's special report on the fears for their homeland held by Zimbabwean exiles in Australia. Saudi Arabia is assuring world oil consumers that it's willing to increase production to meet demand. Oil company and government representatives are in Jeddah for a summit meeting on how to ease the growing global crisis from rising fuel costs. Resources Minister Martin Ferguson, who is attending the summit, wants an end to investment restrictions which curb production. And here the opposition is divided over how much petrol excise should be cut.
Gathering in Jeddah, oil producers and consumers trying to reconcile demand and supply. The Saudis say they're willing.
We will meet demand if demand becomes reality.
But they also know the commodity's value. They're not about to drop the price.
It is in our best interest that we extend the life of petroleum and we maximize the petroleum revenue in the long term.
United States President George Bush wants to increase American oil production offshore and in Alaska. He's urging the Democrat-controlled Congress to lift restrictions with a familiar plea.
Now Americans are paying the price at the pump for this obstruction. So this week I asked Democratic congressional leaders to take the side of working families.
In Jeddah, the Australian Resources Minister wants international production restrictions lifted.
We want to work with like-minded nations, not only the consumers but also the producers, to try and work out how we overcome the impact on ordinary motorists back home, because we know they are hurting.
Back home, the opposition's targeting the Prime Minister.
He said he's going to take the blowtorch to OPEC. I would imagine that Martin Ferguson will be spending most of his time trying to clean up that mess.
The coalition's in its own mess over petrol excise after Liberal backbencher Chris Pearce called for a policy shift from a 5-cent cut to 10.
We're saying that the government should cut at least 5 cents. Cut 5 cents, that's our policy.
At least 5 cents?
5 cents a litre, that's our policy.
Okay.
The Nationals leader wants more.
Well, I would like it to be 10 or 20, but we have to be economically responsible too.
The Australian Democrats want the focus on renewable energy, not petrol. But the Democrats' voices won't be heard for much longer. This week they end 30 years of Senate representation, having lost all 4 of their seats at last year's election. Instead, Labor will negotiate with 5 Greens, Family First Steve Fielding and New Independent Nick Xenophon. He's already expressing concerns about Labor's fuel watch and binge drinking funding.
I think the government's set aside about $57 million. My initial view is that isn't enough.
Lynn Allison's predicting a rocky Senate road ahead.
It wouldn't surprise me if there was a double dissolution election in the not too distant future.
Her party's considering a merger.
We're talking with the Climate Change Coalition right now in doing that.
She's hoping they might be back. Karen Middleton, World News Australia.
There will be more disruptions to Qantas flights around the country due to industrial action by the airline's engineers over a pay dispute. So far, 6 flights departing from Sydney and Melbourne have been cancelled tomorrow. Another 18 flights have been cancelled on Tuesday, affecting Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane airports. The engineers will halt work for up to 4 hours as part of a series of rolling stoppages that may continue until Thursday. Qantas claims the engineers' union has timed the strikes to maximise disruption. The scandal surrounding the federal Labour MP Belinda Neal is intensifying. There are claims the New South Wales backbencher helped to write the statutory declarations drafted by her companions at the restaurant where she allegedly bullied staff. The opposition is accusing the Prime Minister's office of a cover-up and is demanding it comes clean about its involvement.
The so-called Iguana Gate plot thickens. What began as a confrontation between Labour power couple John Della Bosca and Belinda Neal and staff at Gosford Hotel Iguana Joe's is escalating, with new allegations of obstruction and interference.
My concern is the cover-up within the Prime Minister's office. What did the Prime Minister's office advise Belinda Neal to do?
According to a newspaper report, former Belinda Neal staffer Melissa Button has told police that Miss Neal issued instructions on what she and her husband should and shouldn't say in statutory declarations about the incident. Perverting the course of justice and swearing a false statement are criminal offences which could lead to jail. The deputy opposition leaders seeking to widen the net, saying Prime Minister Kevin Rudd must have known what went on between Miss Neal and the staff who dined with her.
Now, this is a man who is a renowned control freak. He knows everything that goes on in his office, yet he told the Parliament he has no idea what advice his staff gave Ms Neal.
The Prime Minister's talking tough.
If anybody breaks the law, then the consequences are severe. That's why this is subject to a police investigation, and as I've said before, no one, repeat nobody, is guaranteed of any future in politics.
This is something which is the subject of a police investigation in New South Wales, and I don't propose to add anything to that.
But the New South Wales opposition says that given allegations of a cover-up, the current police investigation is too narrow. Its leader, Barry O'Farrell, is calling for a full judicial inquiry. Yara Bamoham, World News Australia.
Jane McGrath, wife of former Australian cricketer Glenn McGrath, has died after a long battle with breast cancer. Her health had declined over the past week after surgery earlier in the year. Jane McGrath was a passionate campaigner for research into the illness. She was first diagnosed with breast cancer in 1997. The Prime Minister has paid tribute to Jane McGrath. Mr. Rudd said she was an inspirational figure whose legacy would long benefit others. Overseas again now, and flood warnings have tonight been posted along nearly 1,000 kilometers of the Mississippi River in the United States, amid fears that more than a dozen levees could be breached. The flooding and widespread storms over the past month have forced tens of thousands from their homes along the river, killing a total of 24 people and injuring 148.
This may look like a river now, but just weeks ago it was miles of dry land.
It puts you in tears, you know, and that's about where I'm about ready to go to now, so it's kind of heartbreaking.
In these towns north of St. Louis, they lived through the historic flood of 1993. Now what's supposed to only happen every 500 years is happening again. Unable to get to their waterlogged house, they're wondering whether it might be time to say goodbye to their hometown.
We have memories, you know, we spent our childhood here, so of course you don't want to let it go.
The crest of the swollen Mississippi is surging downstream. It's now at least a foot higher than anyone predicted because of unprecedented floodwaters flowing in from Iowa's rivers. In Clarksville, hope still holds, and the sandbags keep piling up.
I have to soldier on and go forward just like a general. I can't think about what would really happen if I lost this.
The floods and severe weather along the Mississippi River have killed 24 people, forced more than 38,000 from their homes, and inundated nearly 5 million acres in 3 states.
It's like a nightmare. It comes back and haunts you in your sleep.
There is some encouraging news. This disaster is coming to an end. No levee breaks were reported today. That's likely because the more than 24 breaks earlier in the week took pressure off downstream areas. Now everyone is staring at the skies hoping it doesn't rain again.
Communities along the Mississippi say the floods have caused billions of dollars in damage to crops, houses and infrastructure. Environment Minister Peter Garrett says Australia will have a strong voice at the International Whaling Commission meeting in Santiago this week, despite opposition claims that the government has already surrendered to the Japanese on whaling. The Japanese are reported to be unlikely to give ground over their so-called scientific whale hunts. They say some species of the giant mammal are abundant.
It's choppy waters ahead for Environment Minister Peter Garrett as he left for the 5-day meeting of the International Whaling Commission in Chile.
I expect the negotiations will be difficult, tense and tough, but Australia's voice will be strong at all times.
The Environment Minister says Australia wants the focus to be on conservation measures, the economic benefits of whale watching and collaboration with other countries on non-lethal scientific whale research. The opposition claims the whaling battle was lost during Kevin Rudd's recent trip to Japan.
My message to Mr Garrett is don't raise the white flag, don't rule out the International Court of Justice, don't give in to Japan. We've already seen a surrender by Mr Rudd to Japan, in Japan.
It's not the case that we've ruled out taking international court action at all. That remains an option, but at this point in time, we're focused on the International Whaling Commission.
Japan isn't giving any sign of backing away from its controversial whale hunts.
Some of the species are endangered, that's true. Other species are abundant. There are many different species of whales, like any fish, wildlife. And there are many hunting activities, fishing activities, quite sustainable, as you know.
Japan is expected to continue its push for commercial whaling and to allow hunting in coastal areas where whaling has been a tradition. Conservation groups say not only are whales in danger, this documentary called The Rising deals with the issue of dolphin hunting in Japan.
Most of the world doesn't know is that after the moratorium, Japan kept on whaling. They've killed almost 500,000 small cetaceans since the moratorium.
Host nation Chile, leading the Latin American bloc, is keen for the International Whaling Commission to create a whale sanctuary in the international waters of the South Atlantic. Gabby Hills, World News Australia.
You're watching the World News Hour on SBS. Coming up, Darfur's scorched earth, all that's left behind as thousands flee ethnic violence. And kicking the habit, Scottish smokers given a cash incentive to quit.
Just absolute madness.
We're undercover in Zimbabwe with the presidential election looming.
How do you comfort somebody who's 50% of his body has got third-degree burns just because he voted for the party of his choice?
And Iceland's latest tourist menu. A day out whale watching, followed by whale kebab.
A lobster and a whale. You have to chew it, but it's very juicy.
That's Dateline, 8:30 Wednesday here on SBS.
Home is everything to us.
Hiya, Dad.
That's why we chose RACQ Household Insurance.
Hiya.
Heaps of discounts, emergency home assist, pay by the month. Can't go wrong.
Hiya.
For competitive home insurance that's loaded with extras, call RACQ Insurance. We'll help you wherever we can.
Do it again!
RACQ Insurance. Wouldn't be without them, would you?
Everyone's preparing for their favourite Olympic event. Triton VR 4x4 Turbo Diesel for only $34,990 and all the Triton 4x2 cab chassis models with free tray and $500 worth of genuine Mitsubishi accessories. All with the Mitsubishi Diamond Advantage, Australia's best new car warranty and customer care. You'll love the whole range of Olympic deals at the Mitsubishi End of Financial Year event. Ends June 30. Love that car.
Did you know if we were lost and starving, we could actually eat a real snake?
No way!
Absolutely. I can taste the juicy softness now.
But what about the venom? You couldn't eat the head.
Let's see. No artificial colours, no artificial flavours. Sounds pretty non-venomous to me.
The Natural Confectionery Company now has new Bear Hugs, jellies made with real cocoa, giant jellies and mini bags too.
A non-venomous crocodile. Now the rule there is...
Eat it before it eats you.
Politicians in Sudan are reported to have agreed to ask the International Court of Arbitration in The Hague to resolve a conflict over the oil ridge south of the country. The dispute had been threatening to drag Sudan back into civil war. The agreement comes as the government in Khartoum finds itself facing more international scrutiny over violence in the western Darfur region. Still suffering in the aftermath of attacks are the residents of the now almost deserted town of Silia.
We're flying to Darfur's northern corridor, watched all the way by a Sudanese government minder. After 20 minutes, we arrive in Salea, a once bustling town of 10,000 people, but most fled attacks here in February. It's a strange feeling walking around this village. Houses are deserted, they're burnt out here, broken pots. There's no one around, but there's a group of men coming up to see us over here. I don't know who they are. We'll see. They are military-age males. I don't see any weapons. They don't appear hostile. They agree to help us. Adam speaks some English. You're living here?
Yeah.
You're living here. What happened here in this town?
Now here is good, not bad.
It's good, not bad. Good, he says, but amidst people have gone and the feared Janjaweed are nearby. The atmosphere is uneasy. As I talk to the Sheikh, a Sudanese army truck drives by. He tells me they feel safe with the army. People who fled the attacks are coming back, he says. He blames rebels and Janjaweed militias for the fighting. I sense his discomfort. Salea is alive with soldiers. 3 military intelligence officers are assigned to follow me around. This is the UN Human Rights Report about what took place in this village, and it reads, the assault on the town took place in the early afternoon of 8th of February 2008. The ground attack by militia groups was preceded by aerial bombardments by government Antonov planes and helicopter gunships. As I finish reading, the government minder attempts to confiscate the UN report. We refuse to give it up. These pictures, obtained by CNN, were successfully censored by the government until now. The images were shot just 2 days after the fighting, as fires still burned in some houses. Sudanese security chiefs toured the town. The dead were being buried. The living still traumatized. Sudanese officials blame rebels from JEM, the Justice and Equality Movement faction, for the fighting.
The only person to be blaming here, it is JEM. Why they came to the civilian area and start attack the government from among the civilians.
According to the UN, 58,000 people fled Salea and 3 other towns. 115 were killed. The UN report was scathing. The government broke international and humanitarian rights laws. They failed to distinguish between civilian objects and military objectives. Back in Salea, we spot a rare UN peacekeeping patrol. The commanding officer wants to make sure we understand all is not well here. People are afraid and want to leave.
Those were the ones who actually told me that if they have a slighter chance, they thin out.
They get out?
They get out. They sneak out.
It's a 5-year pattern of fighting. These peacekeepers tell me they're unable to stop it.
The United Nations says up to 300,000 people have died from the combined effects of war, famine and disease, and more than 2.2 million have fled their homes since the Darfur conflict broke out in 2003. It's a habit so hard to break that smokers in the Scottish city of Dundee are being offered a financial incentive to quit. Health experts are trialling a new scheme that promises to save the health service millions by swapping ash for cash.
Smoking is one of the biggest killers in Scotland. More than 13,000 people die from its effects every year. Dundee's one of the worst affected cities. 36,000 people smoke regularly, most of them in poorer areas. That's 1 in 4 of the population, which is why health chiefs in Dundee want to pay people to give up. NHS Tayside are hoping to get 1,800 people signed up, with a view to getting 900 of them to give up smoking. Each person will get £12.50 a week credited to a small electronic card at a total cost of £500,000. So how does it work? Well, the money will be credited to this card, and this card allows me to buy any fresh fruit and veg. So, for example, I can buy these raspberries with it. I can also buy veg. What I can't buy is any wine or alcohol. That has to stay put, and of course I also can't buy any cigarettes. Participants will receive nicotine patches from pharmacists, where they'll also undergo tests to make sure they're sticking with their promise to stop smoking.
They come to the pharmacy every week and show that they're tobacco-free using a carbon monoxide breath test, and this shows whether they've been smoking or not.
Dundee's payment scheme, which runs over 2 years, is understood to be the first in the UK, and today received a mixed response from residents.
People have been smoking for years and years. They don't feel it make any difference. Very difficult to stop. I mean, I know I smoke.
Preventing's better than, you know, what it costs the NHS in the long run, but we just stopped last year, obviously without getting any money for it.
Health chiefs acknowledge paying people to give up smoking may not be popular with everyone, but if it works, they say it has the potential to save the NHS millions.
And that was the BBC's Andrew Cassell with Scotland's fight against tobacco. Recapping our top stories now, hundreds are feared drowned aboard a ferry which capsized in rough seas in the central Philippines, a region being battered by flash floods and landslides in the wake of Typhoon Fengshen. More than 500 Tibetan exiles have been arrested in Nepal after fierce rioting broke out over the Olympic torch relay in the neighboring Tibetan capital Lhasa. And the mayor of Mexico City has ordered an investigation into a police crackdown which left 12 people dead in a local nightclub. Police are accused of using excessive force, causing a stampede as hundreds attempted to flee. Now to the second part of our special report on Zimbabweans living in exile here in Australia. More than 10...
About 32 minutes in Australia.